power on.
I like a simple world where common things are done in common ways. I suppose you could say that I'm a man of the people.
We are ordinary, it's true, and that's why we're doing all this. It's this town that isn't normal.
Yes, this abnormal town. How should I put it? The city is like a parody of the sort of novels I used to read when I was younger.
Oh yeah, what kind? Like a William Gibson book?
More like Philip K. Dick. Not as controlling as the societies George Orwell depicted in his work, and not quite as wild as those in Gibson's either.
Philip K. Dick, huh? Never read him. So if I wanted to check him out, which one should I read first?
Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's a classic.
There's an old movie based on that, isn't there?
The content's quite different. You should compare them when you have time someday.
Then I'll go ahead and download it right now.
No. Find the paperback. E-books lack character.
Got all the same words, don't they?
Physical books are more than the words they contain. They're also tools to stimulate your senses and adjust your thinking.
How do you mean?
When I don't feel well, I'll stare at a page forever before realizing I haven't absorbed a word. When that happens, I try to understand why. What's gotten in my way? On the other hand, there are books I can take in effortlessly, no matter how awful I'm feeling. Why do those books draw me in? I think it may be a sort of mental tuning. It's the feeling of the paper against my fingers, that familiar smell of pulp and glue, the momentary stimulation to my brain when I turn each page. These sensations regulate and focus my brain. They make it work better.
Well, that's discouraging. Why is it every time I talk to you, I leave feeling like there's something I've been missing out on my whole life up to now?
Earth, 2019. Dominant species, human. Galactic potential rating, 0. Cultural affiliation, combination of government and global businesses, corporatism, legacy institution. Species still conservative, superstitious, and religious. Ecologically illiterate, largely unaware of cosmological foundation of love. Level of technological dependence is disturbingly higher than the galactic standard. Species distracted and behavior controlled by technology companies. System error. Advanced concepts detected beyond normal human levels. New galactic potential rating, over 9,000. Transmission type, podcast. Host, The Man of Tomorrow. Brian Sovryn. Source, Sovryn Tech.
You know, I usually like to come into this show with a shit ton of energy. And I just tried opening this baby up like 4 times. and I just couldn't hit it. But you know what? You're going to get this. You're going to get this is what I go through when I open this baby up. You ready for this? Usually I just come right out of the music with a nice woo. Well, I'm going to give you a woo, but we're going to, here we go. Ready? You're going to get this as live to tape as you possibly can. You're going to get the Man of Tomorrow opening this baby up. You ready? Here we go. Just imagine that the music just ended, right? Woo! Well, baby, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing, and we are coming out swinging on this episode of Sovryn Tech. The Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R radio star, the man who always wears triple black, Dragonaut 1. Whoa, where'd that come from? You know where that came from, the Hard and Fast podcast. Woo! Got more episodes of that coming, baby, on Zomia 1. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about science, tech, all the good shit. Well, actually, a lot of it's not good shit. Oh, man. We get to talk about one of my favorite subjects in the world, that being books. The other thing we get to talk about is, not one of my favorite subjects in the world. In fact, the polar opposite, that being we're going to talk a little bit of politics, and we'll see what we can get into from there. But opening this, see how that worked? Did you like that? You know, I couldn't get that good I was going to say that good, hot, cold open, but you know what I mean, where you just open it up and just let it go. And folks, I don't really like prep that. I think about it for a second before like the show opens up, but then I just kind of let it go. And for some reason, my tongue just kept tripping up on that starter. So, but then I start and I just say, hey folks, you know what? Trying to get this rolling, trying to get this out there and hot. And you say that, and then I think that gets rid of all the, what's the performance anxiety? Not that I ever get performance anxiety, baby, because I can perform. Oh, can I perform whenever it is needed? And people can attest to this. But anyway, yes. So opening this baby up, though. Like, really, let's get into the foreplay. Let's get into all the little stories happening in science and tech news, even though, actually, one of these stories isn't little at all. It's one of the biggest things I've ever heard. Unbelievable. Very excited about it. But we won't get into that right away. We might talk about Dragonfly, and those that follow me on Twitter, of course, at Sovryn Tech, you know exactly what I'm talking about as far as Dragonfly goes. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But opening this thing up, a very interesting development occurred in the realm of messaging, the realm of instant messaging, perhaps, if you want to go there. And this has to do with one of the two messaging services that I recommend. Okay, now every messaging program out there, every single goddamn one has their problems. That's why, to date, my favorite way or my top way of communicating with encrypted communications, while we still can, wait till you hear HackSec to learn more about that, is to use PGP encrypted emails. Now, for some people, that can be a very complex thing. Not everybody has access to apps like Open Keychain, etc., so it can be a little bit of a pain in the ass, or maybe even Mailvelope, something like that. But the two that I always recommend is either Telegram, which, again, I know there's problems. You don't have to tell the Golden Stallion. And Signal. Those are the main two that I recommend. There's others out there that are pretty good, but those are the two that I think you could even have a remote chance of getting people on board with. And so Telegram had some very interesting developments in the past couple weeks. In fact, particularly they had version 5.8 come out on June 23rd, 2019. And I mean, amazingly, that was just like I think it was like last Sunday, right? That was just coming out on a Sunday. But now the new feature, I'll give you a little bit of the new feature list here, but one of them in particular, I think speaks to a lot of what we've been saying for 7 years on Sovryn Tech. But let's break it down. So first thing is add any users to contacts, even if their phone numbers are not visible. Now in version, I think it was 5.7 of Telegram, they gave a feature in Telegram to where you could hide your telephone number, because Telegram has had usernames for the longest of times. Now, this is a critique that people instantly give, and honestly, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not wrong. And I've heard it for years. I'm well aware of it. We've talked about it many times on this show. The fact that Signal requires, a telephone number to work. And you are identified by your telephone number. And that inherently is not anonymous. That doesn't mean it's not that the encryption's bad, but it's inherently not anonymous. We all know this. Some people, I don't know why, I've seen people on Twitter even recently saying, hot take, but I think Signal sucks because he uses telephone numbers. No fucking shit. We all know this. It's annoying that people, and I get it. Look, I'll be the first to, the reason that it gets used, we talked about this many times, is that it's the easiest way to verify, between, sender and receiver. That's why it gets used. Okay, that's why telephone numbers get used. Would it be better if they didn't have to use telephone numbers? Of fucking course it would. No question. Nobody's arguing that. Nobody's arguing that, we should have telephone numbers visible. Nobody's arguing that. Do you understand? Okay, now, is Signal ever going to do anything about this, much like Telegram recently has? Probably, but I'm sure they're going to come up with a very novel, unique, and ingenious solution to that. Okay? So I'm glad you think it's cute when everybody, when somebody brings that up, but that is the most boring take. It is not a hot take. No fucking shit. Anyway, So Telegram. Now Telegram, of course, I mean, then the argument with Telegram is, oh, they rolled their own crypto. Yeah, I know that one too. Okay, and I always tell you, keep Telegram in perspective, what it is, what it's for, and consider it as something else. Anyway, they have taken a very interesting route with this new version. So, okay. So now you can add people, you can add contacts, even if you can't see their phone number. Great, that's a nice feature. Okay, moving on from that one. Next, it tells you, so here we go. Go to contacts, and you can go to add people nearby to see and add people who also have the section open. So basically, you can just add people without having to even ask for their username or their phone number. And you could just say, okay, both of us, open up to that. And then, Telegram will be aware of who's nearby, of course, because now, are you going to have security concerns around this? I understand. But as I understand it, this basically functions off of, whose accounts are open and where they are based on GPS, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So that's an interesting feature, but there's more. Let's keep going. Host local communities by creating location-based group chats. This is where things get interesting. There's a couple other features. You can toggle message previews for specific chats. Then there's also where you can transfer ownership of groups and channels to a new admin. I mean, those are nice features that really, anything with group functionality really should have. Besides that, the middle one here, what I just mentioned, is what I really want to talk about. Host local communities by creating location-based group chats. Now, what's really interesting about this is that, and I've been touting this for a while, is that eventually, okay, any of these messaging services, any social media, any of this horseshit, okay, that passes itself off as some type of communication over long distance online, and ultimately it's horseshit, and folks, telephones weren't any better. Ultimately, all of that should lead to, if it's worth anything, okay, any part of our interconnected world, if it's worth anything, it should it should allow us to meet perhaps like-minded individuals, or maybe it allows us to meet, non-like-minded individuals, but people that still, bring something, like they still enrich our life in a certain way, right? Because it's good to want to get other perspectives, and maybe you go out there to get other perspectives or something, but as long as you can get those other perspectives in a respectful fashion, then that's beneficial to you, okay? So, reaching out to people, how about we put it this way? Instead of finding like-minded individuals, because I think there's actually, now that I say it, I think there's a bit of a problem with even saying that. But looking for other people that enrich your life. That doesn't mean they have to be like-minded. But if this if the interconnected, the mass communication that we have, and it's bi-directional, right? It can go both ways. It's not radio or even something like a podcast. But if it doesn't allow us to meet other people that enrich our lives, one, it's not worth it. Two, ultimately, meeting people that enrich our lives, certainly, especially then maybe when you start adding in things like like-minded individual and so on, it should ultimately lead us to wanting to actually be nearby in meet space to that person. Okay, ultimately, we should not, basically I'm saying we should never accept Telegram, Signal, email, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, Instagram, all that. Ultimately, we should never accept that as enough. That is good enough communication, that is connection enough with other human beings for me. That should never cross our minds. Ultimately, we should be getting together in real life, sooner or later. Now, I know there's challenges around that, okay? This is a world where money makes it go round and round, right or wrong. I know there's challenges around that, okay? But ultimately, that's where it should lead. The interesting thing here is that Telegram is effectively relocalizing chat. And this is what really blew my mind when I saw this. And I've been kind of low key pushing people, checking out Telegram. Signal could implement a lot of this stuff, and maybe eventually they will. They got that huge, effectively donation to the Signal, and they created the Signal Foundation, right? however many millions of dollars that was from one of the founders of WhatsApp who ended up leaving Facebook. Good for him. So maybe they're just like waiting down the line that they'll end up rolling this out. But in the meantime, while Signal is getting all these new features up and out there, and I'm not saying Signal has to do it, but they could. But in the meantime, you have Telegram, which is a great alternative. I mean, and look, Facebook knows that this has been the deal for a while too. That's why they put out Marketplace, and they're concentrating harder on groups and all this, because I think they know ultimately people, the only real connection they get, and after years of dealing with the bullshit connection that we keep getting sold by Silicon Valley as somehow being enough, be it Skype even or whatever, people are wanting to, no, I want to connect with people around me in my area, right? And I think this is just a way that humans as a species in the world in 2019, this is a direction that they are going, because they are either consciously or unconsciously realizing that Silicon Valley sold us a false bill of goods. The connection that they offer through their services and technologies is not good enough. And I find it very interesting that Telegram, which is run, of course, by Pavel Durov, right? A well-known anarchist and very wealthy one, sure. But he is a full-on anarchist, is recognizing the importance, because every feature goes by, goes by his table. And he is recognizing, no, we need to get people together locally. And I would dare argue that, I'm an anarchist as well, any anarchist worth their salt. I know businesses hate to hear people mention anarchists and all this. But anyway, anyone worth their salt knows that ultimately, to enjoy the freedom and lifestyle that comes with anarchism, eventually we have to get together in meet space. I find it very fascinating that Telegram is putting in multiple features, particularly in Telegram 5.8 that just came out, that enable that. Okay, that allow you to just basically put out a beacon, anybody within a certain geographic area, I'm on Telegram, come and hook, let's connect. I don't want to say hook up, because that might suggest something else. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Fuck, you want to hook up with people? Please, by all means, do so. And for the love of shit, do not use Facebook for that. I think that's great. So anyway, I thought that was interesting that you have one of the premier, including especially for activists, Telegram, what was it in Hong Kong recently, they thought there was a DDoS attack, which Telegram as an organization was claiming was done by China. And the argument goes is that it was being used by activists in Hong Kong. And so the Chinese government, tried to shut down Telegram there. So something used by activists is pushing harder. And is this, local feature within a geographic area? Is this to enable perhaps more activists who are engaging in civil disobedience and, civil displays of expression of the power of the individual? Yeah, I could believe that it's a part of that too, but I think it can be so much more. But ultimately, yes, for you to make change in the world, you have to get together in meet space. Doing it online is not enough. So anyway, very, very interesting. If you haven't checked out Telegram in a while, fine. Don't send out messages that your life fucking depends on. Don't use it for that, okay? If you don't trust the encryption, I understand. The Golden Stallion hears you. I get it. But for what it fucking is, fucking use it. Now, moving on. So, I thought that was fascinating that feature set particularly comes out. And I could almost believe that a good old boy anarchist like Pavel Durov would do that just to piss off the Chinese government. I really could believe that. And I think there's some credit should be given for, when a company does that sort of thing in comparison to how, say, Google will just bend over and grab the ankles for anything that the Chinese government wants. That's the difference here. Okay, right? Like, Google will make their own search engine for China and whatever else, despite when they say that they're going to stop doing that bullshit. They're not stopping any of their plans. Anyway, let's move on from that, get into another bit of a story here during the Foreplay. This is nice. So we talked about it last week, actually, during the Foreplay. That is the new Raspberry Pi 4, which actually I know some Sovryn Tech listeners have already gotten their hands on them. In fact, what's really cool, speaking of local, I know some Sovryn Tech listeners actually got one at their local computer shop, which is faster than getting them online. Fuck yeah! I think that's great. Man, I can't tell you. I really can't tell you how much I miss a good local computer shop. And I mean a real one, not one. I mean, you've got plenty of them in certain towns, especially here at Ice Planet Zero, in New Hampshire. Like you have a lot of college towns here, yeah. And I mean, you name it, Keene, I mean, the whole area, Hanover, by Dartmouth and all this, you've got plenty of them. And they all have their, I don't know, Systems Plus or whatever computer shop, which basically just services Macs and ThinkPads. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but they're not really a computer shop. They're just a way to, I don't know, keep the college running, basically, and, give college kids a good deal on their computer or something. And even then, it's not really a good deal. I mean a genuine, good old-fashioned computer shop, like Babbage's, or even like Electronics Boutique used to do that. Or remember when Radio Shack used to actually sell computers, a good old Tandy? Whew. Boy, I'd jump on that action. Anyway, it's so cool to hear from you, from many Sovereign Tech listeners, that, yeah, you went to your local computer shop and you actually picked up a Raspberry Pi 4 with the 4 gig of RAM on it, which is one of the primary sellers of that system, because now the Raspberry Pi 4 is a desktop computer for approximately a $50 price tag, depending upon which model you go with. And I think that's dynamite. I am so dying to get mine in the mail. I mean, I'm wildly excited for this. And one of the things that I'm pretty sure I said last week is that I hope that Ubuntu Mate, which they made a version of Ubuntu Mate for the original Raspberry Pi 3, said I hope that they update that to where they make a version for the Raspberry Pi 4, especially now that it is really a desktop class computer and could take on quite a few different x86 platforms. So now Ubuntu Mate, via Twitter, has come out and said that, oh yeah, we're working on quite a few hardware projects and the Raspberry Pi 4 is among them. So expect that version of Ubuntu Mate to come out for that. I am very excited for that. I mean, basically one of the main reasons I always loved the Raspberry Pi was because of how, that it could run FreeBSD, among other things. Even though, like, the new version of Raspbian, I've seen it, and I mean, it looks pretty slick. I'll give it credit there. But yeah, Ubuntu Mate, like, as soon as that's out, that's probably what I'm going to end up installing on a Raspberry Pi 4, because, you get so many more options with Ubuntu. I mean, the community is so phenomenal with Ubuntu that, it just makes sense. But Raspbian's great too. I mean, I'm not going to, argue against that. And if that's what you want to use and it comes stock, like maybe you buy the kit for the Raspberry Pi 4, then just fucking run that. Just, you can get Audacity on there. You can have the time, put some games on, do your thing. Nothing wrong with that. Or hell, run Plex on it. I mean, you got a lot of options, but it's a desktop computer now. I want to see those desktop setups. I can't wait to see people running. I mean, as ridiculous as I think it's not ridiculous, but as weird, nay, pointless as it is to run 2 4K monitors on a Raspberry Pi. I can't wait to see those setups. I mean, because the idea, right? It's a little computer, why, but you're going to have these 2 huge 4K monitors. It's just little. I don't get it, but okay. Somebody asked for that, so they gave it to him. Great. Whatever. Rock and roll. Have a great time. But anyway, just so you know, Ubuntu Mate is coming. I kind of figured it would, but now it is very much official. So moving on from that, this is one of the more interesting science stories. I mean, it's still tech, and it's tech that's only possible, as I understand it, it's really only been possible over the past few years. And that is Dragonfly. Now, Dragonfly, I read a few stories from this, and I think there were some people that got kind of confused about what exactly they were announcing, because I know what I had read, and then when I read directly from NASA, as well as particularly from the BBC, they were saying things very different. Like, this was supposed to do some varying passes around, really, we got to understand this. So Dragonfly is a NASA probe that is going to be landing on Titan. And it's not just going to land on Titan. It's going to fly around on Titan. And there's interesting things to say about that, because actually it's easier for something to fly on Titan than it is on Earth, due to various atmospheric conditions. Okay. But yeah, it's gonna go straight to Titan. In fact, I'm amazed at the time frame. Like, Ellen and I were talking about this, and we're like, yeah, it's probably gonna take it like 20 years to get there or something like that. But actually, it's gonna launch in 2026, and it's gonna arrive there in 2034. That's less than a 10-year trip. That I was blown away by that. I mean, it's incredible. But anyway, so yeah, it's just going to go straight to Titan. It's not going to be checking. I was with the understanding it was going to be checking out Saturn a bit and some other things, but apparently it's just heading straight to Titan. Now, this isn't the first time I'd heard about this. In fact, I remember in 2015 there was talk of another mission of this type. Okay, where it wasn't going to be. I mean, this is basically what do they call a rotorcraft? Okay, Dragonfly is a rotorcraft that is, has varying little, I mean, it's like a helicopter drone. And it's just going to be able to bounce around and send signals back, obviously, to Earth. I mean, awesome technology. And I would not be surprised if a lot of a lot of the innovation in the space of, what do you call this? Various drones like quadcopters and all this other stuff. If that really forwarded the technology in a real way for NASA to even come up with something like this. Because I remember just a few years ago, like in 2015, they were talking about missions to Titan, but they were talking about submarines. They weren't talking about rotorcraft. They were saying, yeah, we're going to put submarines, diving into methane lakes and everything, which why not do both? But this is pretty cool. So very expensive program. It's going to be $1 billion. Do I know that that's tax funded? Gee, I don't know. Do you think I know that? Okay. Anyway, I mean, if you want to do something in space, you're not going to trust Elon Musk. I don't know how much you want to trust Bezos. I don't trust the government either, or NASA, but whatever. NASA does it, and they've been doing it for a while. Anyway, so yeah, it's going to fly to different sites. I'm not sure how many hops and jumps it can do. It actually has to be the power supply for it is very, very unique. It's what they call a multi-mission radioisotope thermoelectric generator, MMRTG, which is, I mean, basically that's something that just operates off of radioactive decay. Now, you might be saying, and this is an important thing to bring up, you might be saying to yourself, well, why don't they just put solar panels on it? Aha! But that's because of the atmosphere of Titan, there's not enough sunlight that gets through to the surface of Titan. There's enough to see on Titan, right? And sunlight does hit Titan. In fact, there was I consider it in the top 10 most important pictures ever generated or taken, however you want to put it, by humanity. That is, when we got that picture, was it from Cassini? Where it took a picture and it was a reflection of the sun off of a methane lake on Titan. Stunning picture. I had it on my background for like a year or two because, next to pictures of seeing the surface of Venus, among other things, I mean, it is just one of the most remarkable pictures you could ever see. Now, I mean, obviously we're going to get pictures, eons beyond that, of importance and brilliance and beauty from what Dragonfly is going to do when it finally lands in the 2030s, on Titan. But basically, there's not enough sunlight that gets through. Again, there's enough to see, but there's not enough that gets through for Dragonfly to operate off of solar power. Because you've got a lot of people who, talk about, oh, well, let's, once we get into space, everything could be solar power, blah, blah, blah. Well, not when we land on varying, celestial bodies. I mean, this is something I was going to bring up earlier. It's important to recognize that Saturn really is, in its own way, is its own solar system, right? It's like a mini solar system within a solar system. I mean, it's not solar because it doesn't have a sun, but you get my point. It has so many moons. I mean, and it has let me correct that, because there's things that on other planets I think we would classify as moons that don't get classified as that. But Saturn has so many orbiting bodies. Okay, that, I mean, it really functions like its own, again, it's not solar, but like a solar system. So there's a lot to explore there. Titan isn't as big as Ganymede, but it is one of the places to check out. In fact, I remember there was a show, I think it only had like a pilot, that was on National Geographic, where a guy was testing out what would it actually be like for humans to land on Titan and to try and live on Titan. Now, the temperature on Titan is like around 300 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It's fucking cold, okay? That's why you have methane lakes instead of, water lakes, basically, because methane is the thing that, that can operate in those temperatures and flow. Or that's one of the reasons, anyway, that there's methane lakes there. But, all your mountains are, pure ice, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I remember watching this, and I wish I could remember the name of it. but he was trying it out, and he's like doing mountain climbing and all these parts of the world and everything, to try and simulate even remotely what the temperature, because all the mountains are, ice and everything else on Titan, but just to try and replicate that. But the conclusion of the episode was that, yeah, it actually would be possible for humans to inhabit and at least function to some degree on Titan. Obviously, you'd be wearing suits and, environmental suits of some type and all that, but it's not impossible. And it's a relatively, unlike Ganymede or like Io, it's a fairly stable surface. You don't have crazy volcanoes or things like this. So it's an interesting choice. I know, when we talk about, the more interesting moons in our solar system, you easily come up with Europa, right? Or even Enceladus and, and like that. Those are interesting because they may have life on them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best places for humanity to maybe, land on, and to sit down on, and I don't want to say colonize, but for lack of a better term. I find it intriguing with Dragonfly particularly that, and they said that this thing's going to be able to, fly for, compared to like a Mars rover, it's going to be able to do a good double the distance, cover double the distance on Titan that your average Mars rover does. And again, it just makes sense, and the technology is there now to where a rotorcraft is the practical thing to do. On Mars, you use rovers. You don't use rotorcraft. There's theoretical ways to perhaps use rotorcraft on Mars. In fact, if you remember, boy, this is a long time ago, one of the fictional episodes of Sovryn Tech, which we haven't done one of those in a while. I do plan on getting back to those. But one of the fictional episodes of Sovryn Tech, I had Red Wolf, the helicopter, and it ends up getting redesigned by Dr. Goldblossom, where they put it's a helicopter. It's supposed to be like based off of Airwolf because I'm such an Airwolf fan. And it's redesigned to where it has a third rotor on it. And that is to compensate for Mars, the atmosphere on Mars. So it's possible, but it's very, very complicated. It's much easier to just have a rover on Mars than it is to have, some kind of helicopter, or in this case, a rotorcraft. Titans, it's a different story. A rotorcraft just makes sense. It's the easier thing to do. It's much easier than having a wheeled vehicle of some type. And there's an argument to get into. I don't think I'm going to get into it now because we have other stories to talk about. There's an argument to get into around shall we say the ethics. Yeah, because you could bring up, what right do we have? Just stepping foot, human or even just one of our probes, one of our machines, landing, stepping foot, quote unquote, on any of these worlds could interfere with the evolution of life on those worlds. And I know that's getting very extreme, but I think those are conversations it's time we start having, because as I've been saying for a year or two, we're really just, 5-10 years. So now that'd be 3 to 10, let's just say we're more at this point, we're about 5 to 10 years, or maybe 5 years, I think, away from humans, your everyday humans having space, outer space being available to them, to where it's something that they can go to. We're getting very close to that. We talked about, Bezos's big reveal a few episodes ago, what he was saying on that, and so on. So to have these conversations around the ethics of interfering with the development, potentially the development of life on another celestial body, that's a conversation to have. Now, if it's a rotorcraft, that might feel a little more ethical. Something could develop in the air, certainly. We've only recently on Earth discovered that, there's some kind of like life, not intelligent as we understand it, but like some kind of life, just floating around way up in the atmosphere on Earth. Okay, this is a fairly new development. We covered it on Sovryn Tech probably 5-6 years ago. Okay, but not interfering so much and rolling around and messing with the topography and all these other things, even though Mars rovers are incredibly small. Using a rotorcraft, one could argue that that's the more ethical way to even do that business, to even explore. Conversations to have around that. I'd love to have right now. I would absolutely love to have a giant conversation around, and here, I'm just going to say it, around the fact that there shouldn't be roads, that maybe our primary way of how we should be transporting ourselves around our own planet should be through, through planes of some type, aerial, or, some kind of aerial vehicle. But I'm not going to have that conversation right now. That's something for the future, or maybe if you want, you can ask me about that, and we will talk about it on a Zomia 1 Underground Q&A, and maybe I could get into that conversation, but I'm not going to have that now. We have other things to get into. So anyway, we're done with the foreplay, and we'll get into our main story. But when you're done with the foreplay, you know what time it is then? It's time to take some Blue Chew. You know what I'm talking about. BLU Chew. That's at BLUchew.com. BlueChew.com. Blue Chew. You got to check this stuff out. I have recently been jumping on this. And look, you can take this if you're feeling particularly, you're getting ready to get into bed with that significant other, with that special person in your life. But maybe you're just, you're not feeling it. Maybe it doesn't get as ready as it used to. You know what I'm talking about. All right. You can use Blue Chew for that. Or maybe you're like me and you just want that performance. Woo, what performance. You want it to get to that next level. Well, you can take Blue Chew for that. In fact, let me tell you. So, Ellen and I, we were out. Sometimes you get that feeling, right? You're like, no, it's time. We got to do this. We got to do this now. And you're just feeling randy. Where are you? You're in the middle of nowhere. You're in the car. You're like, all right, let's just pull this thing over. You're there. I'm in the Jeep. There's the back. Ellen and I looking at each other. And you better believe I went for Blue Chew. And there we go. We go in the back. And that Jeep, it's a good thing that I just got all my shocks replaced. Because, Blue Chew had it going on. It was that good. So even if you just want to increase your performance, okay, in bed or in the back of a Jeep, you want to jump on Blue Chew. This is your stuff. Okay, it is the same. Look, Blue Chew brings you the first chewable with the same FDA-approved active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, so you know they work. Okay, again, this isn't just if you can't perform. This is if you just want to perform to that next level. And we are all about getting to that next level on Sovryn Tech, baby. Absolutely. So again, Blue Chew is prescribed online and shipped straight to your door in a discreet package, so no in-person doctor's visits and no waiting in the pharmacy. And best of all, no more awkwardness. Made in the USA, and since Blue Chew prepares and ships direct, they're cheaper than a pharmacy. Right now, got a special deal for Sovryn Tech listeners. You just go to BlueChew.com. Okay, again, that's like the color blue. BlueChew.com and get your first shipment free when you use the special promo code TECH. TECH. Okay, just pay $5 shipping. So again, that's BlueChew.com. BLUECHEW. BlueChew.com. Promo code TECH and try it free. Blue Chew, it's the better, cheaper, faster choice, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Woo, go to it. Just go. BlueChew.com. Do it. Woo, boy. Just had to take my shirt off, actually, thinking back to that time in the Jeep. Blue Chew. Thank you. All right. Now, let's get into our main story, because talking about something that won't work. That is your ebooks. That if you did, and I kind of imagine that most people listening to Sovryn Tech did not do this, but the ebooks that perhaps you bought through the Microsoft Store will no longer work. I'm going to read, of course, we talked about this when this was first announced. They stopped selling books on April 2nd through the Microsoft Store. And remember, because Microsoft was, one of their newer features that they were putting into, is one of the creators updates for Windows 10, was the ability for Microsoft Edge, before it became, the Chromium-based Edge, for it to read EPUBs as well as PDFs. Of course, most browsers can read PDFs, but reading EPUBs is kind of a new thing. And, it made some sense for them to do this, because one of the main selling points for Edge as a browser, and one of its differentiators, not that anybody really took advantage of it, as far as I understand it, and I imagine that that's true, and that's why Microsoft, kind of backed away from this and went more towards Chromium, was its ability for you to mark up the web. Now, I don't mean like markup language, where you put dashes or whatever to make things bold and italic. I mean, or not dash, you know what I mean, the asterisk and all this. I mean, where you could literally, with a touchscreen, you could like draw on web pages and you could save that history of what you did on those web pages. Now, that makes sense for like with digital books, with ebooks, that you would want to, you could actually say with like a Surface, I don't know, any Surface device where it has a touchscreen, where you could use a Surface Pen and then you could literally highlight sections out of a book. So there were some interesting features, and it wasn't crazy overall, it was crazy for Microsoft to sell books. I think it's crazy for just about any company to sell ebooks, unless it's very niche and you're serving some kind of niche community. Amazon just has it cornered. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying I like that. I am just saying that it is so. Okay, and look, I'm glad, we've talked about this recently where Walmart is getting hardcore into the ebook and audiobook game, and they're working with Rakuten, right, with their Kobo e-readers and all this. I get it, okay, but Amazon is so dominant. For Microsoft to try and get in on that, and they never really sold like the Surface Pen book connection. I mean, I never really, I figured that out, that I think that that's what maybe they're hoping for and what would make sense, but I don't recall them ever really like advertising that at all. But bottom line being, it was a failed move. And the Microsoft Store is it's ending up with less and less prominence. Particularly, consider that now in the latest version, in the May 2019 update of Windows 10, you can uninstall a lot of the apps, like the Movies and TV app. You can uninstall Groove. And they already killed their music store. You can just uninstall so many of these apps that were supposed to operate with things you would only buy in the Microsoft Store. They've really backed off of a lot of that. Now, with the books, I think that there's Microsoft backing out of this stuff has given us a very rare opportunity in the tech space to consider, without having to use science fiction, which is a valid thing to do, to contemplate and theorize or wargame where we're going with the technology that we're developing, or the software that we're using, or the service that exists, say social media, etc. But we have the rare opportunity to see what this looks like in action. Okay, like what does it look like, say, in the future if Netflix shuts down? What does it look like if Audible shut down? And I'm not saying those things will, probably not. But you get to consider this. So I'm going to read a little bit here actually from Android Police. The headline is, "The demise of Microsoft's ebook store reminds us that everything will, quote unquote, stop working with DRM." And there's the real killer. But let's read this. "And now for some perspective. Like many of Microsoft's sidecars, the Windows 10 mobile OS, the Zune music player, cross-platform ecosystems, you get the drill, ebooks from the Microsoft Store have had their day. One of the latest casualties this year was the demise of ebooks from the Microsoft Store. Sales ended on April 2nd, and we are mere days from when, thanks to digital rights management, every purchased book will disappear from users' libraries." Stallion breaking in. It's not like you get to keep some kind of, DRM-free version of them or something. Like, for example, GOG, okay, GOG.com, the gaming platform, you can buy games on there. And while they may delist games at some point, if you downloaded them, you get to keep them as most, not all, because sadly, GOG has allowed for some DRM content to kind of sneak into their store. But for the most part, you can download games from there and they will work for as long as the programming that they had when you bought it is interoperable with whatever operating system you're using it on. Okay, and so that's the importance of being DRM free. I actually won't buy games that have any ounce of DRM in them on GOG. I buy from GOG specifically to get DRM free, but I only buy the DRM free stuff. So I won't get in with the other things. Otherwise, I hate to say this, but you might as well be on Steam. Okay. Because, the message needs to be, anyway, that's getting into a whole other subject, and that's something more for the gaming grid. Okay. That's not something for Sovereign Tech really. So, but you get my point. okay, is that there's a way where you can delist things or you can stop selling things like books, like ebooks, but then you would just get rid of the DRM free and let, or you get rid of the DRM in it, make them DRM free, and let the purchaser just keep a digital copy of their book. But that's not what's happening here. So reading on with the story, Microsoft does make for some concessions. All purchases, including pre-orders, will automatically be refunded in Microsoft Store credits, and customers who have marked up or made annotations in their books prior to April 2nd will receive an extra $25 credit. Now, going on with the story, it's a sobering reminder that when people sign up to a digital media platform, they may be building a house of cards. Perhaps it might sound quaint when it comes to mass media, but can be frighteningly painful for services focused on a niche genre or format that happen to be dealing with economic factors that favor everything but licensure and perpetuity. Rob Donahue, co-founder of table game producer Evil Hat, put it pretty succinctly. And I'm going to read from a tweet here by Rob Donahue. And he said, reminded, and this is just from June 26th, okay, so just a couple days before this episode's coming out. Reminded that the Microsoft ebook store closes next week. The DRM'd books will stop working. I cannot believe that sentence. The books will stop working. I keep saying it, and it sounds worse each time. And then at the end of the Android Police story, it says, support your local libraries, folks. Well, anyway, that's another conversation entirely, certainly. Rob Donahue hit the nail on the head with this one. I'm going to read it again. This needs to sink into your head. The books will stop working. I've talked about many times, on the show, really, we've brought up books over and over again. We've had the conversation about books, the importance of reading, the importance of, look, let's not throw away the paper books yet. And look, here, folks, I am not here to tell you that you should be buying paper books. As much as anyone, I love ebooks. I love them. You understand? I have my Kindle Oasis. I have the latest, whatever, the 9th or 10th generation that it is. I upgrade my Kindle pretty regularly. Okay, because I love having an entire library with me at all times. And I love being able to, with the ebook reader, not on my smartphone or even my tablet, but on a specific ebook reader designed for one thing and one thing only. That is the consumption of books, even though the Kindle Oasis can also do, audiobooks. I love that it has that e-ink screen that doesn't wear out my fucking eyes from looking at screens. I don't consider an ebook reader a screen. I talk about all the time, we got to stop staring at these screens all the time. We got to get away from the screens, etc. I don't consider the ebook reader one of those. I am such a fan of ebooks. I have spent, especially over the past few years, I have spent so much money on getting rare books that sometimes cost hundreds, some of them even thousands of dollars. Okay. Getting those turned in, I'd send them off to like Dollar Book Scan or whoever, and I'd say, get these scanned, and I would release them online and all this. Longtime listeners of Sovereign Tech know about this. They're out of print, ancient books, or not ancient. Well, some of them are ancient, but, and I put them out there because I just want the world to have them. I want them to have access to them. Okay. Because the fact that they're out of print and rare, and there's that artificial barrier to them of that stupid price, even though, let's be clear here. Okay. I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this. I don't want to get too off topic. All right. But a lot of times when you go online, here, I'm going to tell you a story just to give you a better comparison. Okay. I used to, in another life, as I like to say I'm on my fourth one now. Over the past few years, I said I've been on my third. Well, now I'm on my fourth. I remember in a previous life helping run a very, very successful eBay business before eBay just became, Amazon Lite. I remember we saw, my partner at the time, we saw there was this pair of shorts that sold for like $2 million. A pair of shorts, just running shorts for some college, some alma mater or some bullshit. And I guarantee you, no shorts, I don't care how great the memory, no fucking pair of shorts are worth $2 million. I don't care how old they are. Maybe if like it was from cavemen or something, like the Iceman was wearing those shorts, okay. But otherwise, no shorts, no pair of green, simple shorts are worth $2 million. What was going on there? Let me tell you what was going on there. I mean, I can't exactly prove this, but let me tell you. That was money laundering. Now, I'm not knocking that necessarily. I am just saying that was money laundering. This is well before, cryptocurrencies or anything were a thing, even though the idea that cryptocurrencies are only used for money laundering has been wildly debunked and just isn't even remotely true that that's the only thing that it's used for. Or, I mean, you know who money launders with Bitcoin? The CIA. I'm not kidding. Government loves Bitcoin. All right. Moving on from that. So the point being is that sometimes when you see these crazy, like this book is up for this amount or something like this, and it sells, and you go, wow, I got to find a copy of that book. You're not going to be able to sell it for the same price often enough, because it's money laundering. That's really what that's being used for. Okay. And I'm not saying that like anything I've ever bought was a part of that, but sometimes when you see these crazy prices on some of these books, that's really what it's about. There's no reason for that book, I don't know, Order of the Order of the Golden Dawn or something like that needs to sell for $500,000. There's that book should be available to anyone. I can say it should be available to all, but maybe a book like that, anyone who's seeking it. Okay. And the only reason that it's selling for that much is because it's part of a money laundering scheme. I mean, I don't think people realize this when you see crazy prices on a lot of things. I mean, sure, there's stuff that gets auctioned and it actually holds that value due to sentimentality or rare or genuine rarity or things like this. But there's plenty of cases online. And I think eBay is actually kind of glad that it's become basically Amazon Lite, because they know that this sort of thing was going on there. That gets them out from under the fire of it. Okay. That's what's going on, that it's just money laundering. Anyway, don't want to get lost in the weeds on that subject, just so you know that that's there. So, but I turn these old books, and I still have plenty more that I send out to Dollar Book Scan here and there, to make them available and to preserve them, because the easiest way for me to preserve them is, and this is why I'm not the biggest fan of paper books. Okay. I mean, I love the feel of paper books. You heard that opening audio. Okay, that's actually from an anime, but you heard that opening audio where it's talking about how, a paper book engages all of the senses and, it does all this other stuff. That is very true. I think an ebook still does, it doesn't do all of the senses like smell and other things, but it does some of that sparking at the same time. Okay, with a specific ebook reader where it's a purpose-built device for that purpose. It's a very different scenario. So I'm not here to tell you that we need to all be buying paper books, because I could not lug around all of the books that I need at my disposal at any given second as a tech journalist, as a historian, and even as a gamer, which I am all three of those. Okay, I can't. There's no way. I would need, the house that I would stay in would have to be a library, because there'd just be so many. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, look, I'm all about book porn, right? The looking at libraries and seeing all those books. Oh my God. I mean, talk about something where you're going to want to pop some Blue Chew afterwards. I mean, shit. I get it. Okay. So, but I'm not arguing for that. What I am arguing for, and what the main concern here is that anything, and this isn't just about books. This is not just about books. Anything that, be it movies, TV shows, I mean, podcasts aren't really falling under this, but, music, albums, all of it. Anything that has DRM can effectively be turned off and made inert, and whatever you spent on it becomes wasted and meaningless, and you can no longer get access to it, which is exactly what's happening to ebooks that were purchased through the Microsoft Store. This is a very real problem. You will never own anything. There is an incredible irony that, say, with the advent of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, one of the most beautiful things I had ever heard about Bitcoin. It was a guy I just love. Was Steve Michaels, where he was saying to me, he was actually at a conference, and he says, the beauty of Bitcoin, when I realized the importance of Bitcoin, was that for the first time, I owned something that the government had no hand on. It was mine, and it had value. And I thought that was a beautiful statement to make. You will never own anything that is digital as long as DRM is baked into that cake. That cake is a lie, folks, right? You will never, it's never yours. It is tantamount to throwing out your money. Just throwing it out, just light it on fire. Again, consider that sentence. The books will stop working. That should terrify anybody that hears that. But that's the direction that we're going. Everybody's putting all their shit on a tablet. Everybody is just streaming off of Spotify. Oh man, what I would give, and I know Spotify lets you locally download music onto a device. I can't wait for the day when Spotify really goes down and all this stuff, and you just have people who suddenly, holy fuck, I can't listen to boy, I want to say some kind of famous pop star, but I hate to sound like an old person because I'm not that old. But I can't even spell these. I don't even know how to pronounce what the fuck I see. I go to the gym, and on the screens they have it's what's the title of the song? It'll be horse shit that came out of my ass by Mixelplick, or I have no idea what the fuck these names are. They're the weirdest goddamn names I've ever seen, and which kills me too, because I remember growing up that everybody thought spelling Motley Crue was kind of funny. Yeah, but at least you can phonetically read that it's Motley Crue. It's clever because it's playing off of that. Now these people's names are M4RL and something it's what is everybody doing leet speak? But apparently they're not leet because fuck, there's DRM in their shit. And if they were elite, they'd say no, don't put any DRM in my crap. And that's an accurate description of their music while we're at it. This is a very, very real problem. That, do you need to, kind of like we were talking about earlier, do you need to frequent places that are DRM free and put your money there, vote with your dollar, okay, and do that instead of, but you know what that means? That means you're going to have to drop out of the cult of Netflix because they're the most egregious of us all. Hell, fuck Netflix. They won't even put half their shit out on Blu-ray, on a physical disc for people. I mean, and that part of it, it's so obvious a control scheme. It's so obvious because there are people, I am ready to put the money down. I will put the money down right now. That says, motherfucker, give me Voltron Legendary Defender all the seasons. Give me Castlevania all the seasons. And I'll buy those Blu-rays. Hell, put them in a nice deluxe package like that big set that came out of Batman the Animated Series, right? That was $130. Fine, I'll put that down. There's plenty of people who put that down. There's no way it's not worth the money. There's no way. But they won't do it. Because it's totally about control. It's about hooking you into that fucking Netflix cult. It's bullshit. Now, can you torrent stuff? Can you torrent ebooks even on sites that offer DRM like Amazon or whatever else? Of course you can. Are there tools available? Fortunately, while we still have operating systems that allow us to get nitty gritty and install custom, or not custom but homebrew, shall we say, software. I mean that's so crazy in itself too. To consider, software used to just be software. But basically, today, if you're not in an app store, it's basically homebrew software. Like Audacity is basically homebrew software, right? I mean, that's what we're coming to because everybody's trying to lock all this shit down. Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. They're trying to lock this stuff down to where you can't install your own software, like independent software. So, and that means that you're not going to be able to install software that would allow you to strip the fucking DRM from whatever, music, books, you name it. But you can do that, and I do that. Every time I buy a book on Amazon, I instantly go through the stripping of the DRM process, and I make a copy, and I put it on, I get it right onto a NAS and make sure it's safe and sound. And that is making copies of copies. We've got to do this. I mean, and frankly, I know this was a thread of conversation on underground Q&As for like a month and a half. In fact, you can look, if you see it in Podbean, in the Podbean app, or if you go to the website, if you go to zomia1.com, you can see like the titles for them. And it's all kind of started off with this idea that entertainment is dead. I mean, I think like today, entertainment is so much shit. There's a reason people are nuts about podcasts, but entertainment is so much shit. And the reason being is that now everything has these most preposterous of budgets. Like even video games, just these insane multi-million dollar, shy of $1 billion budgets. Now, the thing is that when you put that much money into something, you've got to make that back, right? Because you want to try and do double your budget. How can you do double your budget? You have to appeal, okay, of whatever it takes to make the media that you're talking about. You have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. You have to get as many people, as many butts in the seats, as many eyes on the content, as many ears on the hook, okay? Or, you have to have as many people as possible buying your shit, buying a ticket, do whatever. Because otherwise, or buying the game, because otherwise, I mean, you can't do it. It's not economically feasible for you to do it. But that's the thing, is that entertainment today has gotten so outrageous that entertainment has to stay dumb. It has to stay dumb. Otherwise, it cannot make the money that it costs to fucking make the spectacle that is before your eyes. And I say this to you, and look, I know about prestige pieces, but even those are like a dead art. In books, music, movies, all across the board, that seems to be pretty much a dead thing. Okay. I say all of this to you to frankly say, you know what? There isn't really any good new shit out there anyway. Or if there is, it's probably based off of a franchise that's been around for over a decade or more. Okay. There isn't. So who cares? In fact, we didn't get to this. I didn't get into it on a recent episode of Gaming Grid. It's going to come up on an upcoming episode of TIE Fighter Renegades, okay, on Zomia 1. But, I thought the best announcements to come out of E3, which is, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, right? Which is, obviously a major gaming conference, the biggest arguably in the world, next to maybe something in Tokyo. But you get my point, okay? In my opinion, the biggest announcements to come out of E3, one of those is the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But Legend of Zelda, why do people get excited about that? Because it has a track record going back to the 80s of being some of the greatest games ever made. But it's old, see. It's not new. There's that. I thought the TurboGrafx 16 Mini announcement, a console that's decades old, getting re-released, was interesting. And then one of the biggest things was Limited Run Games, a company that's doing a cottage business, frankly, that's doing very well for themselves because they're selling physical copies of games. Holy shit! Not digital versions. They're selling physical copies. How is there a market for that? Well, this kind of points at this, right? This whole story with Microsoft, closing their ebooks and not even letting you access them. Great, they're giving you a refund. Oh, gee, thanks. I think I'd rather have my book. It's why I bought it in the fucking first place. But anyway, Limited Run Games, they are re-releasing classic LucasArts games, a lot of classic Star Wars games that still hold up and still stand the test of time. I think that was one of, if not, in my opinion, the biggest announcement at E3 in 2019. Okay, but this is talking about doing physical editions of games that have been around for decades. And that's the thing, even in gaming, like all the great shit's already been made. All the great stuff's already been released. All the great movies have already been made. In fact, people recognize that if they don't see it now, they see it later, right? Like now Star Trek The Motion Picture, which for years on this show, on Sovryn Tech, okay, it was a tradition to mention Star Trek every episode of Sovryn Tech because, well, that's in my blood, folks. Okay, so, but, like Star Trek The Motion Picture was considered... so much, it was so boring. Everybody hated it. And I know, I've been going to conventions my whole life. I've heard it over and over again. Oh yeah, but that one's boring and all that. Now everybody's like, oh no, fuck, this movie's great. This is awesome. Or you consider like the movie Cleopatra, one of the greatest movies, if not the greatest movie ever made. Okay. At the time, it was kind of, for a lot of people, it didn't do great money, for one, and there's reasons for that have to do with the way theaters work. But it was not looked upon kindly. Now it's considered, holy shit, this is a masterpiece, right? And again, I think people are going back, looking at the classic content that was made at a time before this. We have to appeal to the lowest fucking common denominator of people. We have to appeal to the dumbasses. And they're going back and they're seeing this stuff and they go, actually, fuck, I don't know what it is about this. I can't put my finger on it, but somehow, even though I know 20 years ago people said this movie sucked, for some reason now, actually, that's a great movie. And I think that's why, because there was at least an ounce of intelligence in what was put together there. So again, the reason I say all this is that, if you're worried because you're getting off of some DRM-filled platform for whatever digital download horseshit you're going to grab, don't worry about it. Because I don't think you're going to miss out on too much. And there's plenty of classics that are as good today as they were 50 years ago, 60 years ago, hell, maybe 100 years ago. In fact, get really saucy. Get really saucy. Start reading that stuff. Why don't you go back? How many of you have ever actually read Mary Shelley? This is arguably, I know there's other people who did it before, okay, and other women for that matter. But arguably the start of science fiction. How many of you have read that book? I guarantee you not enough. Get some history, get some understanding, see where all this stuff came from, and get a look at content, media, that was about the passion of the artist more so than it was about asses in seats. Okay, or that was not about trying to, accompany some bullshit, tech giant just trying to be everything like Microsoft was. And I'm glad they learned their fucking lesson. Okay, but I don't know how much they learned it. To just like schlep all this stuff on you and then they have to pull it out from underneath you once it's not economically viable. This is a very real concern, folks, because again, all the data points, the metadata that the tech giants collect, they are now basing everything on, okay, does this do $1 billion? And if it doesn't do $1 billion, good fucking bye. Goodbye. And that you lose the opportunity for things to perhaps more organically become a big deal. That's kind of the big scare here as well, in my opinion. In fact, I mentioned Star Trek. And with Star Trek, with the rating systems at the time in the late 60s, right? The original series looked like it was a shit show. It looked like, oh no, nobody's watching this damn thing. But they didn't know because they were only tracking a few of the larger city markets. They had no idea. Then you get like the new version of Nielsen ratings and so on. And suddenly you find out in syndication, holy shit, everybody's watching this. And then, and look, it wasn't just Star Wars. They knew, the property owners, which at the time I think they would have been, well, I guess it would have been Paramount at the time, which didn't get bought out by Viacom, or was that Viacom? Anyway, that gets crazy. But the rights holders, shall we say, which that's kind of its own DRM, another conversation, okay? IP is bullshit. But the rights holders at the time for Star Trek, they knew, before Star Wars came out, they knew that Star Trek was white hot. And so they started doing Star Trek Phase 2. Originally, Star Trek was going to be, like a TV show. Then Star Wars comes out and they're like, oh, fuck no, we got to turn this into a movie. You're going to make this into a movie. And then in 79, we end up with the classic Star Trek the Motion Picture, which fortunately they just let Gene Roddenberry, and all the writers do their thing because they had no idea what made for good science fiction, right? And so you could create a very intelligent, thoughtful film, which Star Trek the Motion Picture is. Okay, but to my point is that we have companies making decisions on how we interconnect, how we do business, how we, again, interconnect with each other, be it for transactions, communication, whatever. And they base it off of what they think is very accurate metadata. But then that metadata does not allow for one of the, I dare say, intrinsic parts of the human condition, and that is the ineffable. The things that we can't exactly explain, the unconscious, that cause us to be attracted or to use or to lean towards something. And we're not getting that opportunity with anything anymore. Because as soon as something isn't doing $1 billion, it gets taken away from us before perhaps it can be sat upon and thought about and chewed to where, oh no, we actually love that. Oh, we'd like to keep using that. Oh, we came up with this clever new use for this thing. No, it gets ripped away from us. All because of DRM, closed source, IP, they're all branches on that same fucking tree of control and authoritarianism. It's that serious. The books will stop working. Let that just ruminate. Let that go around in your head, and you tell me what you're going to end up doing differently. In fact, if you really want to tell me, I'd love to read it on the show. bbs@sovryntech.com. Again, I'm not saying stop doing ebooks, but you got to reconsider this DRM stuff and start voting with your fucking dollar already. I'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. Hey, if you have a project that needs reliable cryptocurrency data, check out blocktap.io. Blocktap.io is a universal cryptocurrency API. You can get historical prices for Bitcoin and other digital assets that you can use to build charts and do market analysis. Blockchain data is also indexed, so you can get transaction statistics, address balances, and more for Bitcoin and other networks. Blocktap.io is free for personal use, and you don't even need to create an account to access the API. To get started, try some of the example queries on the homepage at blocktap.io. Again, that's blocktap.io. blocktap.io, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Woo, let's get back to the show. In 2014, he ran from Miami to San Francisco, raising awareness for Bitcoin and the homeless epidemic in America, and now he's doing it again. Blockchain evangelist and advocate for homeless rights Jason King is running across North America right now, from Miami to Santa Monica, right now. 5 years later, his commitment to promoting blockchain technology and fighting the homeless epidemic in America is stronger than ever. And you can help Jason now by going to blockchainacrossamerica.com. While you're there, donate to Satoshi Forest Sanctuary Incorporated to help the homeless, along with all kinds of other ways you can help. Get involved today. blockchainacrossamerica.com. That's blockchainacrossamerica.com.
The Climax.
It is time for The Climax, where I get to talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about. It could be a book, could be a TV show, could be a comic book, could be a movie, could be a topic, could be anything. And I think it's actually kind of fitting to talk about this here. Now, I had planned to talk about this. I'm going to talk about a movie. We were just kind of talking about movies and entertainment overall, so this sort of fits to get this in here. I had planned to talk about this actually some weeks ago for a climax. I had it lined up. And that movie is the 1980 Flash Gordon. And I think, well, anyway, we'll get into that. I do want to say quick. So there is a lot of news making the rounds. In fact, if you're following me on Twitter, at Sovryn Tech, I shared it there. About the Trump administration wanting to ban end-to-end encryption, similar to, but perhaps even more to a greater extreme and greater extent than Australia did. I think was that last year. Or was that earlier this year, 2019? I will be keeping an eye on this story. I mean, it's certainly, even if this conversation around end-to-end encryption getting banned isn't shut down instantly, I think that shows very clearly how anti-freedom the Trump administration is, despite what some other asshats want to say. But we will get into that. Maybe we'll save that for the next episode of Sovryn Tech. So, but what I want to talk about now, because it is the climax, again, where I can talk about anything. Doesn't even have to be science or tech. But I think this fits in to some degree with the conversation that we were just having, which is the first time I've really had that conversation in public. I've had the conversation and fielded the questions around it for some time if you were a Zomia 1 Underground member. Now, if you want to become a Zomia 1 Underground member, I need you to go to zomia1.com. Okay, and you can join. It's right on the left on the sidebar. There's a little hamburger at the top that'll come out on this, and you can see it right there. So become a Zomia 1. There's a lot of different levels you can join at, but any level is going to get you access to just a shit ton of content. Thousands and thousands of hours of content, as well as new content that comes out every single week, only to Zomia 1 Underground members. So you're going to want to jump on that. Now, all of that said, like I said, we've had this conversation around this concept that the modern problem of entertainment, the modern problem of media, and I think media is realizing that the jig is up, okay? Like that eventually technology, ironically, unless they start reining people in, like a lot of, at the operating system level, that a lot of modern operating systems are trying to do. Android, Chrome OS, I mean, I know Chrome OS has added in the ability to run Linux apps, but even that compatibility is very... In fact, there's almost a conversation to have around that. The Linux compatibility on Chrome OS, I kind of wonder if they're just trying to be selective, so that way you can't just fucking install anything on there. Granted, on a Chromebook, you can install a version of Linux. Linux avoids all the concerns that I'm describing, but every, popular operating system is really trying to create its own ecosystem that you get trapped in. Because if you're not trapped, you have sounds like $6 billion or $6 million man. Today it'd be $6 million, I suppose. But the $6 million man, we have the technology, right? Today you have the technology to perhaps liberate the media that you consume from DRM, or you have the ability, you have the tools, the software, hardware, whatever, that is democratized to where you can make your own content, your own movies, your own music, etc. Not that doesn't come with its own concerns, okay? Because, the great thing, and this is true of music, this is true of movies, this is true of all of it. The greatest thing today is that anybody can make their own, their own entertainment. They can make their own media. They can make their own music, their own movies, their own shows, whatever. The worst thing today is that everyone can make their own music, their own movies, their own shows, whatever. It's a two-edged sword, because it's allowing a lot of very shitty amateurs to, and then, they're just really, maybe they're really great at SEO or something, and you end up like wasting your time, and how horrible is that? I mean, this is such a big conversation, because I'm not saying that like movie production companies or even, the record companies as they stand are unethical scumbags, but that's not to say that like, some kind of curation business isn't worthwhile. Okay. I think it's very worthwhile that there are people who greenlight things and who say, no, that's never going to get made. I really think that there's something worthwhile in that. So don't think, I know what I'm saying for some people probably sounds really extreme, but I'm not exactly as extreme as you think. I just want the best possible fucking art and entertainment out there. That's really my goal here. Okay. And part of the reason that I'm talking about so much of this is because it's not out there. Okay. And so I've often had to make my own. I've put out books, audio theater. I've done all kinds, as much shit as I can that I think reaches a level of production, that stands up with things of the past, maybe before all this shit was democratized. But anyway, regardless of all that, speaking of a movie that certainly only came out, we're done with that part of the conversation. A movie that probably only came out because of the success of Star Wars, which, let's be clear here, like, there was a good chance Star Wars was not going to get made. But the right people happened to talk to the right person, and they were willing to throw George Lucas $10 million, and, then the rest is history. And, it's an important point to bring up, because A New Hope, Star Wars A New Hope, which I famously, and I know I get shit for this, and for those that love it, including, my dearly departed friend, Chris Pasquini, which you can hear about that on last week's Sovryn Tech. I know he loved it, so I don't say this this is my opinions, my thoughts on it, and we had a mutual respect around this, okay? And I know my other, my co-host for TIE Fighter Renegades, in fact, the last episode of TIE Fighter Renegades that came out, he and I had a back and forth around this whole conversation, around Flash Gordon, the 1980 Flash Gordon, and how it compares to Star Wars A New Hope. And I said, at the time, that I think Flash Gordon is an infinitely better film than A New Hope. Infinitely. I mean, on every, and look, folks, in art, there are such things as objective metrics in art. Does something look more realistic? Does something look, like more intricate? More time was spent on it? Does something look higher budget? Does the sound, are the effects of, again, that gets into the realism part of it. Is the music, more apropos? I mean, there are, I know people are like, well, art is subjective. No, but there are objective parts to production of art and entertainment. And there is objectively superior. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for you. Like, you might think that if somebody's just going to, instead of Queen doing the soundtrack for Flash Gordon, if they had, I don't know, like, what's a stupid band out there? Like the White Stripes. Okay, where they only play a couple instruments or something. Maybe that's better for you, even though the production level is certainly significantly higher for what Queen is going to give you. Okay, but you might think that, oh no, the White Stripes soundtrack would work much better, which actually I could think of a song where maybe that would work better in Flash Gordon at one point, but that's neither here nor there. So my point is there are some objective metrics, okay, within art. And so it's important to consider that while what A New Hope did, especially with special effects, what John Dykstra and what would eventually become ILM and so on, were doing was groundbreaking, innovative, brilliant, and had never really been done before. There's no question about that. It is unquestionable that it was only a $10 million budget, and that budget created a lot of limitations. Okay, for example, to compare A New Hope and Flash Gordon. I'll talk more about Flash Gordon in a second, because I think everybody should watch this movie. Just look at the wardrobe in Flash Gordon. I mean, I think the wardrobe alone probably cost more than the entire budget of A New Hope in Flash Gordon. So is Flash Gordon, quote unquote, better in the wardrobe department? It's superior, sure. Like, the production value is higher. It's noticeable. And is it, well, no, George Lucas was just doing what he wanted. No. George Lucas wishes that he could have spent that kind of money on wardrobe. You just look at episode 1 and every outfit that, Padme wears in that, and you tell me that George Lucas doesn't care about, fucking wardrobe. Bullshit. He gives a huge shit about that. In fact, I think even, the fact of just how good the wardrobe was in Flash Gordon probably was a bit of a spur in his side. Anyway, part of the reason of this comparison is that a guy that I actually generally like, that being Christian Harloff, on Collider Jedi Council, which is a Star Wars podcast, a competitor. I do a Star Wars podcast too. We compete. He made a comment basically like, there's a reason we're talking about Star Wars and we're not talking about Flash Gordon today. Now, I know, and if you listen to the conversation Rob and I had on TIE Fighter Renegades, I know originally Star Wars was actually supposed to be Flash Gordon. Like, George Lucas wanted to make Flash Gordon. Okay? Much like, Steven Spielberg wanted to make a James Bond movie, and then George Lucas said, oh, no, I got something better, and they end up making Indiana Jones together, and it's beautiful. Right? So originally that was supposed to be Flash Gordon, and certainly I can imagine that's why Dino De Laurentiis and so on, why they said, okay, well, Star Wars is huge. Let's get going right now. We got to get this, this Flash Gordon movie out. Now, I know in the past there were like the scriptwriters and Dino De Laurentiis, who was an absolute mogul in Hollywood. I mean, he's the reason we got Conan. I mean, Dune. There's tons of great movies, and both of those are great, by the way. He wanted it to be funny. He really, really wanted Flash Gordon to be funny. Apparently the scriptwriters and even like Sam Jones had some issues with direction and production. And they were wanting it to be more serious. And a lot of people are saying, well, in hindsight, if we had made Flash Gordon more serious, it would have been great. I don't agree with that. I think the more humorous aspect of it, the more ridiculous aspect of it, I think that allows everything in it to really work. Because more so than even comic book movies today, except for maybe like Ang Lee's Hulk. And I said Ang Lee's Hulk. I have never seen a movie that looked more like a comic book to this day. I mean, or maybe, you know, Tim Burton's, I mean, after the fact, kind of retroactively, Tim Burton's Batman, the 89 Batman, looks like a comic book. But that's kind of cart before the horse, sort of. Well, not what I mean by that. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Regardless, okay, Flash Gordon looks like a comic book. And I think that if you, especially at the time, if you were way too serious with that, it wouldn't have hit with anybody. And some of the best lines and the quickness with which you accept the situations that the characters are in. If it was if it was taken too seriously, you wouldn't buy it. It wouldn't work for you. Okay, now Star Wars is the original film. It did it first. That was, you know, it was kind of the first major blockbuster, right? I read an interesting article recently, actually, that said that the 89 Batman, speaking of that, was actually the film that gave us modern Hollywood. Like a lot of people, and this was like an article in Forbes. This is one of their main writers for this sort of stuff. Even they're realizing that modern Hollywood has a very real problem. Okay, because it is all about this lowest common denominator bullshit. And most people want to point at Star Wars as being the first in that. I still think a case could be made that Star Wars was the first to do that. I think Star Wars was so huge. I want to address this point, okay, about Star Wars, you know, A New Hope. The reason why we're talking about Star Wars and not Flash Gordon. I want to address that point, but I don't think it's for the same reasons that other people think it is. Star Wars, I think, would fall under, and I know this is going to be kind of weird for me to say, and believe me, I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I really do. But it very much is lowest common denominator entertainment. But here's the rub, okay? It's lowest common denominator entertainment. The movies are lowest common denominator entertainment. And maybe, like, and you can tell, too, because when George Lucas didn't have, like, a yes man around him, there were plenty of, or not yes men, when he didn't have people who would argue with him, there were, like, he wanted to do some pretty dark shit in Return of the Jedi. But he had other people who were telling him, no, you don't do that, do this. And I think those other people, a lot of them were telling George, you need to make this mass consumable. Okay? Like Empire Strikes Back was going to do insane money no matter what, right? Because A New Hope was the biggest movie of all time at the time. There's no way it wasn't going to do insane money. So you could get away with, you know, it being a very different and perhaps not so much something that attracts the lowest common denominator kind of movie. Okay, but then also pay attention to the fact that most people look back at The Empire Strikes Back as being the best one. Why? Because it wasn't trying to please everybody. In fact, it ends with the bad guys winning, which is something that I love about it, even though my favorite movie in Star Wars is actually Return of the Jedi. But that's another conversation for another time. Which one that I've had many times, actually, on TIE Fighter Renegades and elsewhere. But so here's the thing with Star Wars, okay? And I'm not saying Flash Gordon wasn't necessarily made for the lowest common denominator, but I appreciate that Dino De Laurentiis basically said, no, we're going to make this my way. And he had people around him saying, no, we need to make it serious. We need to do this. Otherwise, people aren't going to be on with it. I'm glad that Dino was wanting to make the movie that he wanted to make, because now it stands out as something very special. And the writing is still very good. I've brought this up many times. Like, it's amazing how quickly in that movie you accept, just by the fact of a couple things. One is that Flash Gordon is a quarterback for the New York Jets. So, and regardless of any New York Jets jokes, so you accept him as he's a guy that is physically capable and he's a leader, right? Because your quarterback, especially back then, perhaps more so, was a leader, okay? had to make calls on the fly, whatever, even if they couldn't get something from the coach, whatever. Okay. So you accepted that quickly about him. And then he makes this line about where he's talking to Dale Arden and he says, yeah, I've been taking flying lessons. Now he's a quarterback for the New York Jets. He's probably making a good amount of money. You believe instantly. Again, just a couple lines. You only know one thing about the character and you get a little line and you actually believe that this guy can fly around in rocket ships, throughout Mongo. Right, throughout Emperor Ming's whatever the hell that is, his like it's almost like another dimension, but it's kind of like another dimension, because it can consume other like planets and solar systems and it brings it in, just like potentially he hands over, he offers Earth as a kingdom of Mongo to Flash Gordon, which means that that I guess it would come into Mongo's whatever that dimension that is, that they end up like traveling through to get there in the first place, that being Zarkov, Flash Gordon and Dale Arden and so on. But very quickly, like the writing's so good, you very quickly accept that these characters are capable of what is going on in the movie. I mean, there's a couple points where it's a little weird, like suddenly Dale Arden can like do this flip, even though you get hints that maybe she was a cheerleader when she was younger, because there's a point where she's kind of cheerleading Flash when he's during the awesome action sequence. And really, the action sequences, and again, the believability and kind of the ridiculousness, but it still like works. When he's throwing around like those green things like footballs at Clytus's soldiers and everything. And I mean, it works. And it's, even though it's kind of over the top, the over the topness just gives you shortcuts to believability. Okay. And so I think that it's brilliant. And it's such, you look at that movie, it is such a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous film. Infinitely more gorgeous than anything A New Hope was doing. And the movie, by the way, like did its budget in spades. I mean, people really, really like this film. I mean, this is a film that stands, and I think it still stands. It still looks so good. It very much stands the test of time. Just as well as far as look, writing, etc. I think it still stands up just as well as A New Hope does. So this comment that the reason we're talking about Star Wars is because it's so much fucking better than, or the reason is because A New Hope is so much better than Flash Gordon. Of course, Empire Strikes Back would also come out in 1980. No, because I don't think A New Hope is a better film than Flash Gordon for plenty of reasons. You can just look at it. I think the writing is better. And I mean, hey, what did Harrison Ford say to George Lucas? He said, "Oh, you can write this, George, but we can't speak it." I don't think anybody really had that problem during Flash Gordon. I know Sam Jones, who played Flash Gordon, he didn't like some of his lines that got edited in after the fact or whatever. Okay, and and that's really why there wasn't a second Flash Gordon movie, was because Sam Jones walked away. He said, "No, I'm not interested in doing it. You fucked with my dialogue and my character." In fact, there's edits in. We don't even know the guy who spoke the lines for Sam Jones in Flash Gordon. It's weird that happened. I don't know what the story is around that. Nobody does. But regardless, okay, that's why there was never a sequel. It's not because Flash Gordon didn't do money or because people didn't love it or didn't think it was popular. But now here's the rub. I don't think Star Wars... earlier we were talking about how Limited Run Games is re-releasing a lot of classic LucasArts games. Like they're re-releasing TIE Fighter, they're re-releasing X-Wing, they're re-releasing, just a whole bunch of classic Star Wars games from like the late 80s and 90s. Do you know why they can do that? Why that's like economically viable for a little company like Limited Run Games, a great company, but a little company like Limited Run Games? Because people love these fucking games because these games are great. But here's what you have to understand. In the 80s and 90s, gaming was still niche. Okay, there was still a specific audience, and everybody just thought it was like 10-year-old boys. But there was a very specific audience regardless, even though that's not true, that it was just 10-year-old boys. So when you're a niche, you don't try to make something that everybody can play. You try to make something that everybody within your niche can play, right? And so you end up with what are still, to this day, some of the greatest games ever made. If not, in my opinion, I think TIE Fighter is the greatest game. The greatest video game ever fucking made, straight up, is TIE Fighter from 1993 and 94. You can do that because those games were awesome. And so here's my point, is that Star Wars, is still talked about today, not because the movies were great, not because the original trilogy, was great. I mean, I think it was. I think there's great shit there, especially Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are two of the greatest movies ever made. But it's not because of that. Star Wars is still talked about today. Star Wars is still alive. Star Wars still sells because of the passion that everything outside of the Star Wars movies engendered in the fans. Okay, it was the marketing machine with like the toys, with the collectibles and all that. It was all these things that Hollywood didn't know yet was replicable at that time. Like if Flash Gordon had I think it did have toys, but if it had a huge toy line and if somebody made like a really great video game with it and believed in it like that, no, we would still be talking about Flash Gordon today. And I think Sam Jones be damned. I think he's Christian now. He'd probably hate that, but whatever. Sam Jones be damned. I think we'd still have Flash Gordon movies. This is nonsense that it's because the Star Wars movies are so much fucking better than the 1980 Flash Gordon. Again, on every metric. I mean, okay, let's go down the list. Are you really going to say George Lucas is that great a director? I think he is, but do most people think he's a great director? No. So the directors, on par. You could put anybody in charge of Flash Gordon and it'd be on par with George Lucas. Okay, in the popular mindset. Even though, again, I do think George Lucas is actually a great director. The writer, what more needs to be said? Okay, actors. I mean, for how many decades did Mark Hamill get made fun of for being wooden in that role? And that the real winners for A New Hope were Harrison Ford, who was just out of nowhere, just knocked everybody's socks off, and of course Sir Alec Guinness. But I mean, you've got in Flash Gordon, you have Max von Sydow, who, by the way, is in Star Wars or was in Star Wars now, right at the beginning of The Force Awakens. One of the greatest actors of all time. You had Timothy Dalton, Topple. I mean, you had top-notch actors in Flash Gordon. The effects, I think the effects work beautifully. And in fact, I think it's a more original concept of it, like being more like in this other dimension where it's not really space, but it kind of operates like space. I think that's beautiful. Or fuck, I didn't even mention Brian Blessed. I mean, tremendous actors in Flash Gordon. And you could say Sam Jones's acting wasn't that great. Well, again, and I love Mark Hamill. He is the heart of the tiger to me. Okay, I mean, I practically worship that man. You understand? But, let's be clear. Read up about people's reviews of Mark Hamill's acting in A New Hope. Compare that to Sam Jones. And I mean, so I don't think, again, I think it's all very even. Music-wise, John Williams is phenomenal. Is Queen phenomenal? You tell me. Damn skippy they are. And it's a great soundtrack, too. They go pound for pound. I would only argue that some of the production levels, and partly because of the success of Star Wars, that they were confident in putting down more money on the budget for Flash Gordon, okay, which it was a high-budget movie at the time, somewhere over $20 million. That's high budget back then. In fact, like Dune, what did Dune have, 42 million or something? That was unheard of at the time. Unheard of. Over time, that changes, but back then, that was huge. Granted, that was due to the success of Star Wars, sure. But again, I think Flash Gordon has everything and more than what A New Hope has. The only reason we're not talking about it has nothing to do with the movies. It has nothing to do with the movies. Star Wars is still so well thought of and white hot because of the more evangelistic parts of its fan base. And that evangelistic part of that fan base was soaking up everything they could of Star Wars, and things outside of the movies were genuinely some of the greatest shit ever made, especially the video games, Timothy Zahn's novels, Dark Horse's comics. You go down the list of them. They're awesome. They are dark. They are deep. They are action-packed. They are fun. They're all these things. And they are appealing to the Star Wars fan, and so they get nitty-gritty. And they engender more of that passion, more so than even the movies do. So I'm very annoyed at this idea, that, I understand people love A New Hope. Great. I know how groundbreaking it was. No one's arguing against that. I know that Flash Gordon wouldn't be what it was in 1980 if it weren't for what Star Wars did. But the idea, honestly, a lot of what Star Wars did, actually, the 1930s Flash Gordon did first. And I would almost argue Buster Crabbe did it better. It's the 1930s. You have to compare it I mean, the production levels couldn't be that great then. I understand that. But regardless, I mean, a lot of it was a first. I mean, there's a reason Star Wars originally was going to be a Flash Gordon movie, because Flash Gordon already had all of those elements in it. So, I mean, and this is something where I say that I don't, on any top 10 list of greatest movies ever made, I mean, Empire Strikes Back might be able to get in there. Even though Return of the Jedi is my favorite, that's not like, that's a great Star Wars movie. It's the best Star Wars movie. And an argument could be made that Star Wars are the greatest, overall as an entire package are the greatest movies ever made, right? By the way, to prove my point again, also quick, like the prequels, Star Wars fans hated those because George Lucas wasn't listening to anybody who was telling him this is how you have to make it for the populace, right? Like, remember Steven Spielberg for episode 1 said to him, George, nobody's going to understand the ending. Don't do it that way. And George went ahead anyway. He didn't change it, based on Spielberg's recommendations. Okay. That just proves my point that when you haven't, and I love the prequels. I really love the prequels. And part of the reason I love them is because George Lucas, come hell or high water, was going to make those his way, and he didn't. I don't even know that he cared about what money it would make because he was funding them. It wasn't like Fox was going to lose money on that deal. They were just the distributors. So, I mean, that stands on my it's all about the asses and seats, point. But anyway, this idea that like Star Wars, is somehow, oh yeah, no, we're talking about this because this is the greatest stuff ever made. No, I don't think so. I think there are much better, far better films out there. Star Wars, again, in my opinion, Star Wars is great because of everything outside of the movies that complemented the movies. And then when you see the movies are that much richer because of everything outside of them. That's what makes the magic. Okay, I mean, yeah, A New Hope was groundbreaking, but come on, it's not that good a film. It's just not. And there's plenty of science fiction and fantasy or space opera or whatever that blows it out of the water, in my opinion. I mean, it really does. It's good. I'm not saying it's not good. But it's just, no. And I want this conversation, I'm doing this here because I really want this conversation to be public. And I want to get my point out there. Because that was, I mean, I just thought that comment of saying, oh, this is so much better than Flash Gordon, that was such crap. Like, oh, stop, I love Star Wars as much as anybody. I'm looking up, I got a TIE fighter right there. I have spent so much of my life on things Star Wars related. I mean, I am all in. You understand, on Star Wars. Right here, it's right in front of me. I have a technical manual for TIE fighters, a Haynes guide, for fuck's sake. I've spent, I was talking about scanning books. I've scanned so many Star Wars books that like will never come out in an ebook version, but I wanted to preserve them. That's how much I care about Star Wars. I love Star Wars. You hear me? But I can also admit that, God damn it, no, like these comments that, oh, Star Wars is the fucking bee's knees. Sorry, not so. And I've said this for years on the show. Star Trek's better than Star Wars, for fuck's sake. So anyway, I'm going to wrap that up with that. Flash Gordon, if you've never seen this, check this out. While you're going back, while you're giving the middle finger, okay, to modern entertainment, as you should, I want you to go back. You can check out Flash Gordon and just sit back and just enjoy it for what it is, that it is over the top, that it is ostentatious, that it is ridiculous. Okay, but at the same time, there is some goosebumps inducing action. Max von Sydow's acting is fantastic. It is sexy. Queen's soundtrack is phenomenal. You'll be singing it and humming it forever. Brian Blessed, leading the Hawkmen is just tremendous. And there's some great writing in there. It's a properly done origin story. So check it out if you never have. There's so much to love with the 1980 Flash Gordon. There's been a lot of remakes of Flash Gordon as a franchise over the years. None of them have really stood up as well as that because, and they were still pretty respectful to the comic strip and to what Buster Crabbe had done in the 30s. Do I love that movie. So check it out. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode of Sovryn Tech. We'll wrap this baby up. Kind of turned into a single topic show in its own way. Thank you so much to all of the sponsors of the show, and I will see all of you on the other side. And go sign up for the Zomia 1 Underground. Go, do it. Interact with me. Come on. Go. Zomia1.com. All right, I'll see you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.
Whoa! Can you get enough of the Man of Tomorrow? I didn't think so. Well, now you're going to get even more, along with some of the hottest hosts and podcasts around, because now Sovryn Tech has become an entire network. Woo! Zomia One, the most rebellious podcast network in the galaxy, with bleeding edge shows covering science, technology, and even pop culture. Podcasts like Sovereign Trek, bringing you the latest and greatest in everything Star Trek. TIE Fighter Renegades, a Star Wars podcast, where the Man of Tomorrow and Robin Freebeard talk Star Wars like no other show out there. The Hard and Fast podcast, where metal is king and the latest album reviews and interviews with the greatest acts in hard rock and heavy metal happen. And you can even become a member of the Zomia One Underground and get access to thousands of hours of exclusive content and shows. And this isn't Patreon, baby. Oh no, this is all happening on the premier podcast platform, Podbean. So head over to Zomia1.com, that's ZOMIAONE.com, and become a part of the future with Zomia One, and become a member of the Zomia One Underground. And while you're at it, download the Podbean app on iOS and Android. Be the future. Zomia1.com.